What is up, my dudes? My name is Rain, and today we will be color grading these two shots here to look a little bit more cinematic and movie-like. To do that, let's open up the color tab up here. And this is what it should look like, or something like this. If you don't see these lumetri scopes over here, click on Window and then lumetri scopes right here. And you probably only see the lumetri color, looking something like this. But now that we have those windows open, let's quickly go over everything that we can do. So first off, as we can see, the shot is a little bit dark. We recorded this in bright daylight and it doesn't really look like that. So let's adjust the exposure. The exposure basically just makes sure the image is bright or dark. And you just have to find a good sweet spot. And after doing that, I usually crank up the saturation to 300 because that just makes it way easier to correct the white balance. Occasionally you will have footage that looks like this, that's like really blue. In that case you just have to make it a little bit warmer. And sometimes you might have like a little bit of a green or purplish tint in there, so you might want to adjust these settings as well. So this is what my footage needs. Let's go back to something like 123. I think we can actually like go up to like 150. That obviously depends on the footage. I'm using HLG3 on my Sony ZV-E10, which is kinda desaturated and with low contrast, which makes it easier to edit in post. But anyway, after we adjusted white balance and exposure, we can start going through these settings. I usually start with the blacks. You just have to make sure that they are not clipping like this, because that just makes it look really weird and washed out. So just make sure that it looks something like this. Same thing with the whites. You don't always have to make sure that they're like all the way up here. In this example, I think this is actually too bright, so I'm gonna put it like right here. And now the rest we can adjust with the shadows and the highlights. And once we have a satisfying image, we can just crank up the contrast a little bit. In my case, that's only 15, so you might not need a lot. Anyway, this is the before and after. Already a lot brighter and much more contrast. So let's move on with the other options that we have here. Here under creative, we can choose a look. And as you can see, they all already look kind of cinematic and movie-like, depending on which one you use. This one, for example. And you might find one and think to yourself, wow, this already looks pretty decent. I don't really need to do much. Then in that case, you can just go with these. But in my case, I'm not going to choose a lot, and I'm just going to create my own look. So some cameras have a more softened look and some cameras look way sharper. In my case, it is kind of soft, so I'm going to sharpen the image a little bit. Don't go too crazy, otherwise it's going to look kind of edgy and harsh. But in this case, it actually looks pretty good, so I might go down to 75. Additionally, you can add some vibrance, which just makes the colors pop out more. But as you can see, that can result in really weird edges in the colors, so don't go overboard with it. I usually put it around like something between 15 and 30. Now, if you wanted to, you could add this faded film effect, which would crank everything together like this. And this is actually pretty common in some movies, where the blacks are not really black, they're kind of milky, and the whites are not really white, they are kind of grayish. So this would be the easiest way to do that. However, I'm going to create this effect myself in the next step, so I'm not going to do this. If you wanted to, down here, you could give the shadows like a tint. For example, here, light blue, and then the highlights like teal. So you'd have this teal and orange look. However, I'm going to do that a little bit later in the progress. So let's look at the curves right now. First thing we'll need to do is make this S shape, which will create that like filmish look with the milky blacks and the grayed out whites. And once you have this slight S curve, you can adjust these. For example, if I pull this down even further, then obviously the image is going to get a lot darker in the darker areas. And if I pull this up, obviously the sky is going to get really blown out. But overall, this should just add a little bit more contrast and wash out the dark and bright areas. Next up, we can adjust colors. With this thing down here, we can choose a color. Like for example, my arm is kind of orange. And now if we pull this up, everything that's orange just gets boosted with saturation. In my case, I actually want to do the opposite. My arm is kind of like orangey yellowish, so I want to take that out a little bit. And then down here we can change the color kind of. For example, if I go on this purple thingy here and move this around, it changes its color. So this could be useful, for example, for skin colors. So again, I'm going to create a dot here in the yellowish area and pull this up a little bit. So now when I turn this on and off, you should see that my arm gets kind of more reddish instead of this weird yellow tone. For some reason, the colors from the ZVE10 just come out this way. Next up, you can change the brightness of certain colors. For example, if I wanted the sky to be a little bit darker, I could just create a few dots here and pull down the blue. But obviously that looks kind of weird. So you gotta be really careful with using hue versus luma. In my case, I'm going to use this to make the skin tones a little bit brighter. And hell yeah, that is curves. Now we get into the color. And here's what I usually like to do. I like to do this like teal and orange kind of look. So I usually pull down the shadows into the tealish kind of color. But like that, I think that's neat. And then either the midtones or the highlights, you pull slightly to the like orange side. Maybe like this. So now when we A/B this is before, this is after. So now it has a lot more color. Additionally, you could also change the brightness of the areas. For example, because of me adding all this blue, this looks a little bit washed out now. So I'm gonna take this down and create a little bit more contrast back here. And yeah, lastly, we can go in here and either create a vignette or try to lighten up an already existing vignette by adding the amount. And hell yeah, this is our before and after. So let's go into the second clip and do the same things again, and this time a little bit faster, of course. So first off, let's make sure the exposure is correct. Next up, let's change the white balance. This is very warm, something like that. And now we can pop that back to 150. Adjust the blacks, make sure that they don't clip down here. Adjust the whites. We do have like this little thing up here, I think, or down here, but that's not really that important. Now I can adjust the shadows and stuff. And hell yeah, before and after. Now let's sharpen the image because this is very soft. Around 75 should be enough again. Yes. Add a little bit more vibrance. I think I might go all the way to 30 here. Now let's do the S-curve quickly. I see this is very contrast heavy, so I'm going to pull this up a little bit. And hell yeah, that looks decent. This orange in the background is really aggressive, so I'm going to select this entire range here and pull it down a little bit. I'm also going to make my skin tones a little bit more reddish again. And now, boom, pull the shadows into the blue and the highlights into the orange. And lastly, a little bit of a vignette. Hell yeah. So now we have the before and after. I hope this video was helpful. I will link a few more helpful ones in the comments that you can check out. And yeah, make sure to leave a like and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.